The river breathed like a sleeping beast beyond the walls. Every exhalation a salt-wet gust that brought tar and ash and the faint sour tang of corpses upriver. Torches guttered along the battlements, their flames smothered by damp wind. Their smoke teased into the night and lost among the greater plumes that rolled over the Blackwater like storm-bent banners. On the far shore the city sloped away into darkness, rooflines like upturned boats, alleyways as tight as wounds, the domes and towers and needle spires no more than blacker shapes against the smothered sky. Between city and sea, the great mouth worked and worried. Green as a bruise where the current caught the lantern light, green where Helene's men had siphoned and sealed, green where barrels slumbered in their arc of galleys, tight-bellied, waiting. Tywin Lannister licked lips gritty with ash and thought he could taste the alchemist's promise, that pepper-metal glow that clung to the back of the throat. It would be good for them, the small folk said, to have a hand with stores of the stuff. Good to salt the water with the king's wrath. Good to send the sea itself to war at the click of a clever man's tongue. He smiled into the wind and let it sting his eyes until they watered. Cold? Bronn asked, boots hooked on the crenel that had seen better masons. Always, Tyrion said, though the night was warm as bathwater and the damp had crept under his linen to cling like a fever. How fares your throat? I would not have my cell's word mute when the shouting starts. It would dismay our enemies to be cursed so mildly. Bronn's grin showed bright and indecent as a cut. I can spit fire enough when coin's in it. And when coin is not in it? Tyrion asked, for the sake of the shape of the words. Beneath them, the chain that would strangle a fleet slumbered beneath the current. Iron links big as a man's waist threaded across the channel to the opposite towers. Hammers had beat it all day and all night, rings drawn from the bellies of foundries like gut. Now it waited, a sleeping snake coiled across the water. The two engine houses crouched like old dogs on their stone plinths, iron teeth sunk into axles, ratchets impatient for signal. When coin's not in it, Bronn said, I spit all the same, just don't expect me to swallow. Tyrion snorted, a vile image. Remind me to forbid you poetry on the morrow. He leaned left, peering down the line of the wall to where the mud gate brooded. The gatehouse sat fat and low at the water's edge, staring out with murder holes and arrow slits like so many mean eyes. The hound's men clustered beneath it in little knots, iron hoods pushed back, hands quick at their belts, laughter too loud. Fire skittish, all of them. The hound most of all lately, though Tyrion would not say it aloud. You did not name a fear when a man's fear was his last scrap of armor. A bell tolled from somewhere inland, then another out of step with the first so that the notes slid past one another like drunks in a corridor. The sound climbed the slope of roofs, fell back into alleys, was swallowed by the river's wet lip. Under the bells, a distant rhythm. Drums on the south bank, fat and sullen. Stannis was coming with his hunger and his law and his clean, cold eyes. Stannis had crossed storms and kin to come, and would cross any chain a clever dwarf could lay in his path. Do they know? Bronn asked. About the trick? Tyrion watched the dark. The trick floated out there now among the lowing hulks, dressed as helplessness. Empty ships with slack sails and decks as barren as picked bones. He had birthed them from the iron gate with false names, peopled them with shadows and soot. He wondered what name they'd wear in songs if songs survived this night. No, he said, or not enough to matter. For a time they were silent. Helene the pyromancer had shuffled up hours ago, his breath gone sour with pride, his skin gleaming green in torch glow, to murmur about yields and potencies and the beauty of fine copper. He had kissed Tyrion's hands with his eyes while his mouth told him fire would carry, fire would leap, fire would bite iron and eat water, that the seven hells were only different rooms in the same great house of his art, and he had keys for all of them. Tyrion had held his stare and asked the one question that mattered. Would it burn the city, too? Helene had smiled with the indulgence of a nursemaid. Only if you bid it, my lord hand. Only if you bid it wrong. Bells? Bronn said again, as if there were merit in counting them. Let them ring, Tyrion said. If we are damned, we may as well be rung for. Another gust breathed along the wall. From the east, Faint as rumor, there came the answering clatter of hooves. Tyrion turned his ear toward it and thought the wind played tricks. Tywin Lannister had marched from Harrenhal through a country of torches and rumor, gathering straggle and spear, and now his riders were close enough that the city stones could hear their bits. Or else it was a fever dream. Do not hope, he told the muscle of his chest. Hope makes men foolish, and you have little enough wit to spare. He thought of his father's hands, square and pale and steady as a smith's. He had seen them only thrice in 2 years, and once had felt them at his throat. The memory made him smile. If Lord Tywin rode at last, it would be to own the victory Tyrion had bought with barrels and river and uglier work besides. If he rode and the city lived, the singers would remember how the old lion turned the tide, how he broke Stannis on the banks, how his banners were the first through the smoke. The dwarf would be an anecdote to set off that golden tale. All the better. The dwarf preferred to live in footnotes. Down at the mud gate, a torch flared and went out. The drums on the south bank grew louder, the beat marching up the current like a line of men unseen. Tyrion lifted his hand. A boy at his elbow, a black-haired thing too thin to lift a pike and too young to be so narrow-eyed, sprinted along the merlons to relay the signal. In the engine houses, ratchets clacked like teeth biting down. Out on the river, lights appeared, so many at once that you could believe stars had trembled and fallen to float upon the water. Lanterns along a prow, lanterns stitched along a line of hulls. From above, the shapes came forward shy as dreaming, then bold as death. The first froth of Stannis' fleet. Tyrion wanted to count them, to speak the number aloud. 50, 60 more. Galleys and cogs, rivercraft pressed into service, great-bellied carracks with high castles at stern and bow, their sails furled so that oarsmen could work like heart muscle. Rowlocks creaked, oars scooped. The river protested like a man weighted with stones. They came on with shields hung along their rails and little faces peeping through the gaps, their voices low, their captains stung by their own courage. Somewhere in that forest of masts and shadowcloth was a ship in which Tyrion had been born to drown, in which the city's story would end neatly, trussed and sunk. Somewhere there was a man with Stannis Baratheon's eyes looking forward as if the night had already yielded. Now? Bronn asked. Not yet, Tyrion breathed. He could feel the current worrying the chain against its sockets like a dog trying its leash. The mechanism in each tower shook, a low iron growl you felt more than heard. The river wanted its path. He closed his eyes a moment, envied that want, and then opened them again because the world was happening without him. Halene's empty ships floated out to meet the oncoming line, drifting as if their crews had panicked and leapt overboard. Stannis' captains slowed, drew back into order, horns sounding, oarsmen holding while the front rank bobbed. The first of the decoys bumped a galley's flank and the sound carried up and along the wall. A soft kiss followed by the scritch of hull on hull. A man shouted. Another shouted back. A line was thrown, then another. The decoy took them docilely, letting itself be dragged into place like a lamb into a butcher's corridor. Now, Tyrion said, and when he said it, Halene's apprentice on the nearest tower put Bran to rope. For a heartbeat there was only rope fire, that snake-quick hiss of twine running bright. The fire raced down into a cradle and kissed a clay-stoppered neck. The barrels out in the channel woke together, not with the sound of fire catching but with the sound of the world forgetting itself. It was not a roar at first, not a crack. It was a breath drawn too fast, a vacuum tugging at the eardrums, a huge indrawn gasp that pulled the river toward it. Then all at once it changed its mind and exhaled green. Wind found his hair and batted it. Heat slapped him across the face so hard his knees buckled and he laughed from the shock. In the channel below, a flower had opened vast as a market square, petals of emerald light unfurling and curling back upon one another with the laziness of an eel. When they touched wood they turned frantic, when they touched pitch they lifted, and when they touched men they screamed. The screams were white within the green, naked things without clothing. The flower seated itself along the water. The cords that bound barrels to decoy hulls smoldered, burned, dropped, and the freed pots rolled, bumping along into the flanks of ships that had not yet understood their error. A stern took fire along its scalloped edge, and the fire licked forward like a woman tasting a lip. Archers along the wall saw their own arrows alight not from torches but from air. Men threw buckets of water and made it worse, as if shame had been thrown to a scandal to smother it and had become a stage. "Pretty," Bronn said, which was less than it deserved. And then a sliver of light threw itself across the battlement and kissed his leather jerkin, and he swore and stamped, and it held on stubbornly, snake's tongue to hide. Tyrion dropped and slapped at it with his hands. When it went out, it left a char that looked as if a small god had pressed a finger through cloth and stopped only at the skin. Displeased with what he found, the chain began to lift. It came up with iron's own reluctance, water vomiting from the links as if it could hold it down by weight. The engine houses shook. Men swore. Timbers groaned as the ratchets climbed and set. Out in the channel, ship after ship realized the river's mouth had teeth and tried to turn. Those that had already passed above the rising curve were trapped with it behind them like a man with a wall at his back and a shouting crowd ahead. A few galleys scrabbled at oars, backs bent, oar blades biting and slipping, and for their pains they shredded their own wake. "Open the gate," Tyrion said, though his mouth was dry as sand. "Now, slowly, enough to let our lads out. Hound or no hound." Bronn's grin returned, lean and mean as a dog that had learned to take kicks and give back. "I'll go down," he said, and was gone. Tyrion leaned over the battlement again, hair and skin prickling with the heat as if he were a roasting pig that had thoughts. From here he could see the mud gate yawning by inches, the drawbridge lowering like a sigh. He glanced inland and caught movement along the street of flour, lurching tawny dots emerging around a corner like somebody upended a sack of autumn leaves. A troop of men-at-arms under gold and crimson pennants clattered through the square before the great September's shadow swallowed them. No, not a troop, not even a company, a good household's guard at most. "Where are you, father?" Trumpets from the south, horns from the city, the river speaking in green syllables. On the rampart the boy with the narrow eyes swore softly, the word too big in his mouth, and Tyrion nearly laughed again because it sounded sincere. From the gate a swarm of figures belched out. Lannister guards, gold cloaks, a handful of Sellswords with their straps gone black in the heat, and rushed the nearest grappling ladders with pole hooks and axes. On the waterline a galley's prow butted the quay and was held there by the press of ships behind. Men tried to leap the gap and fell, falling slow, falling like flies in honey toward the fire. Above them, in the towers, cogs creaked, ratchets set their teeth. The chain rose another thigh's breadth. Its topmost curve choked and seized a carrack by the waist. Tyrion mounted the steps to the tower where the fire rope had been lit. The platform stank of pitch and brine and alchemical sweets. Haleen himself was there now, swaddled in robes that had once been white and were now attended by stains like prayers. "My lord hand," he whispered, as if breath would disturb the delicate arrangements of a satisfied god. "This is what we might do if only, Tyrion murmured. He gripped the parapet. The night moved as a single thing, and every part of it hated every other part. Ships that were not yet burning tried to run against wind and chain. Men on decks smeared with green flame ran like drunks in a crowded tent, colliding and bouncing off rigging, searching for decisions that did not exist. A trebuchet arm fire-lit and outlined looked like the rib of some ribald giant. The wildfire, once it had got upon a ship, burned down into its belly and found the other jars they had hidden there. And then that ship became a bell that rang pieces of itself far up into the night. He did not see the arrow leave the bow. Later, when the moment played back, he would remember an impression of a glint far below, as of a fish turning in a deep pool, and then the boy with the narrow eyes was a man with a fallen face, and his mouth was trying to say something around the shaft that had sprouted from it. He went backward, lips working, trying to spit the word out the way he had spit the oath. Tyrion found himself with one hand on the boy's jerkin as if to steady him for more cursing, and then his palm was wet where it had no call to be and he let go, and the boy lay very instructively on the planks and bled. The hound's shout carried up from the gate. A moment later the hound himself was a shape in the yard, huge, heedless of line and rank, driving men to him with the shape of his shoulders and his voice. "Not that way," he roared, though which way he meant no one could tell, and every way looked wrong. Tyrion swallowed bile and iron and moved. The world had come to the place where speeches were of no use. There was a small ladder on the inner face of the wall. He took it without thinking, boots on splinters, breath ripping. At the bottom, the yard was a shaking bowl of light and noise. Ser Mandon Moore waited near the gate, still as fresh snow, visor down. Tyrion put a hand to his pauldron, and the knight bent at once, ice accommodating touch, to offer his knee. The dwarf clambered up, cursing the length of his legs, took the lance Podrick thrust at him, Pod's hand shaking but his fingers tight, and when they burst out through the opening the knight took his breath the way the sea takes a man stepping off a skiff. They were a tide broken from its shore and nevertheless determined to drown. He saw no banners, only colors smashed and smeared by fire, but he thought he saw Garland Tyrell's ghost, Renly's antlered helm, ride along the lip of the quay where there was no proper road, thought he saw men turn and break because dreams had stepped onto the field dressed as an old promise. He saw Stannis' spearmen form and break and form again like a man with a fever clutching sheets and throwing them off. He saw the chain's high curve hold a ship as a child would hold a doll to punish it for being pretty. He saw a trebuchet arm tumble. No, not a trebuchet arm. A man. A great man with golden lions for eyes. Then the press shifted and the thought popped like a fish egg and was gone. Later. It would come later, like wine turned sour on the tongue only after the mouth had closed around it. Ser Mandon bent his head toward him. "This way, my lord," came the voice from within the helmet, flat as a ruler, and the Baratheon shield wall before the gate became a ladder for death to climb. Men jumped down from it and found the spaces between their feet had been filled with knives. Tyrion ducked a pike head, lunged forward, played at being taller with the lance's reach, felt the recoil of impact travel back along ash wood into the small sockets of his shoulder, killing like an idea. It was not a noble thing he did or a clean thing. It was a grub's work, gnawing, but he was good enough at it to live a moment longer. For a while it was nothing but that work. The river gnawed at the quay, the green bit at the river, the drafts of night tangled their limbs with Smoke's limbs. He forgot to be clever. He forgot to be short. It was a mercy. He became aware of Ser Mandon's horse sidling and Ser Mandon's hand, gauntlet, solid as a fate, settling at his back. "My lord," the voice said, "an arrow." He turned his head, found there was indeed an arrow lodged in the groove of his gorget, glanced off by luck. He smiled to show he was not frightened of such small things anymore. The hand at his back did not move, pressed. He felt rather than saw the lance come up under his arm, felt the horse turn, felt the world tilt. Ser Mandon's sword rose. It had no personal quarrel with him, that sword. It had been a sword before he was born, would be a sword when his bones were buttons. It descended with immaculate intent. Podrick's cry was higher than a boy's ought to be. The splash as Ser Mandon fell away sounded like a secret being drowned. Tyrion slumped, blood hot in his mouth and sweeter than it should have been. The horse bowls beneath him blurred. He let go of the lance and clutched at mane and saddle and found neither. Then there was only the quay, a stone, red running along its little ridges, and boots that did not belong to him stepping across his field of vision. He thought he saw, far along the river, a pale horse's head flash where the smoke was thinner. He thought it wore lions on its trappings, little heads stitched in gold. He thought he saw that horse rear as a fell of light ran like a shiver across the ground. He thought a shape beneath the horse went down and did not get up. He thought, absurdly, of baked apples cooling on a windowsill in Lannisport when he was small, how their skins wrinkled and shone, almost green. He laughed at the memory because it was wrong and felt the laugh tear somewhere soft. He would have died then and not been missed by anyone who mattered, but a pair of hands hooked under his armpits and dragged. The hands were not gentle, and that meant they were honest. The world came back small as a bowl lit by a single candle. The candle had Sansa Stark's eyes, wide and pale and fixed, and the bowl was Maegor's great hall made private by fear. The hum of the city came through the walls in waves. The space was crowded with ladies and old men and boys not yet called to blood, and the air smelled of roses and sweat and the tang of spilled wine. Cersei had made a little court there to be admired by those who would admire her and terrified by those who could do nothing else. She had a goblet in her hand. There was a stain on her lower lip like a bruise made by a lover who would not be named. "Sing," she said to Sansa, and Sansa sang because she had been made to sing before and had learned that there were kinds of song that were doors and kinds that were chains. The girl's voice floated pale as candle smoke. It fell on the ladies like a veil and left their eyes bright with tears because every woman in the hall, whether she had a husband on the wall or a son or a secret, has a store of songs she holds against frightening nights. She thought of her moth. Yeah. She thought of her father. She thought of a dark courtyard and a red sword. The notes lodged in her throat like bones, and she swallowed them again because there was no use choking on something that would not feed you. Cersei listened and did not listen. When she shut her eyes, she was nowhere that a song could light, and when she opened them, she was on a throne too large for her bones. A small boy leaned against her knee, his hair dull gold in the candlelight, his cheek hot where it pressed against her gown. Tommen had cried and cried until there was no more in him. Now he slept the thin sleep of children in noisy rooms, his breath catching whenever the hall full of frightened people remembered to be frightened all at once and hummed like a disturbed hive. Ser Island stood at the foot of the dais, silent and attentive as a dog that has been told to heel and will obey until the moment its master needs its teeth. His sword sat naked across his hands. In the far corner old Maester Pycelle performed the rituals of shaking and of smoothing his beard, a priest attending a god whose rites he cannot quite recall. Lancel Lannister had bled through the linen at his waist and had the pallor of gracefully dying men. His every word a little sermon about loyalty. Cersei had learned to hate sermons without making faces. There was nothing more tedious than a cousin in love with your queenliness. When the floor trembled and the lamps flared, a ripple went through the hall. Sansa faltered and Cersei disliked her for it because someone had to hold the tone steady. Let her sing, she told no one in particular. Let her sing of fair maids and foolish wars. It is what she is for. The door to the hall opened with discourtesy. The guards at it had fallen into the way of opening their queen's door, as if they resented being made to act like ushers. This time, at least, they were right to resent. A woman pushed past them in a rush of green velvet and excused herself to no one. Her hair had set itself free from its careful shape and was coiled like a temper on either side of her face. She carried the scent of horses with her as if the night had made her ride within it. Lady Margaery Tyrell knew where to stand. She moved to a place where her presence could be both seen and denied, within bowshot of the throne if the throne had archers. She dipped a courtesy that was deep enough to acknowledge and shallow enough to deny subordination and said, "Your Grace, there is word." "There is always word," Cersei answered, sitting straighter because she refused to be smaller. "And there is always wine." She held out her cup and a handmaiden poured with shaking hands. The wine left a smear down the stem. Cersei thought of licking it and did not. "Is the city fallen?" "The city stands," Margaery said. She had not brought grandmother with her into this hall, which either meant the old woman had learned to keep to her bower when wolves sniffed, or meant she had sent her youngest flower where the wolves were thickest. "Our men have entered by the king's gate. Ser Garland leads the van." Cersei thought of a dead boy in a tent and his peach. "Renly leads nothing," she said mildly. Margaery's look did not move. "Ser Garland wears his armor, Your Grace." The men cheered to see it. There was a small stir among the ladies, a sigh or a hiss. Cersei did not look to see who had made it. She drank. The wine turned weightless in her mouth. "Ser Loras did not lead?" "He is with the right," Margaery said. "At the mud gate." Her eyes slid, almost without seeming to slide, toward the sword at Ser Island's hand and then away again. "The river burned. The Seven preserved us from that, though it did much good." The hesitation of a girl measuring a word against risk. "And some harm." "Your Grace," said a voice thinner than duty. It belonged to Lancel. Cersei let him belong to it. He was paler now than the linen at his hip. The hound fled his post. The men, he paused to wobble. We quench our spears in wine, as the poets say. The poets are fools, Cersei said, then realized she had said it aloud and did not retract it because it felt like honesty. They tell lies to make fear sound respectable. The doors opened again. This time it was a man in a soot-matted cloak and a face blacked with smoke until his eyes were the only honest part of him. He ran when perhaps he ought to have walked and fell to his knees when perhaps he ought to have bowed. "Your Grace," he panted. "Victory. The Lord Tyrell, Ser Tarly, Ser Garland, by the King's Gate. We have broken them." A murmur like rain. Cersei put a palm against Tommen's hair and felt a steadying. "We," she said. "Lords of the Reach," he spilled. "Lord Tywin's columns from the north joined us in the second hour of the night. We have the river. The chain caught them, and the fire." "Where is my father?" she asked, and only later heard the way the pronoun had sounded like clutching. The man made a shape with his hands as if the word were something he wished he could hold. "The Lord hand came upon the left, Your Grace," he said carefully. "He rode at the head." He licked his lips. There was falling masonry at the mudgate, some throwing engine broke. There was During the press a light ran along the quay, the kind Haleen makes. It touched the stones. "The Lord Tywin's horse," he stopped. He had the broad freckled look of a farmer's son. He said, simply, honestly, without flourish, "He is fallen, Your Grace." For a half-beat nothing that mattered moved. The Queen's face remained a face. Her fingers continued to make the small motion in Tommen's hair that said comfort and calm, though she had not meant it. Her mouth moved to say something scathing about liars. Instead, she discovered she had swallowed the last of her wine. "What did I tell you?" murmured Lady Tanda Stokeworth to no one, and then looked mortified that she had made a sound and hid behind her daughter's shoulder. Lady Marjorie did not move. She had learned a great deal in a short time. She kept her eyes on the throne as if she expected it to explode, but the throne was good at not exploding. What it did was simply remain too large for any man or woman. She glanced, once only, at the sword in Ser Island's hands. "Leave us," Cersei said, and the hall heard a queen's voice and obeyed because it did not want to be cut by the lack of obeying. The ladies and old men and boys departed by twos and threes and knots, trailing whispers like skirts. Lady Marjorie hesitated, as if to go now would be to be rude to a new widow. Cersei set her cup down with care. "You too," she added, and the courtesy the Tyrell girl performed made a sound like silk tearing. When at last she and Ser Island and Pycelle and Lancel were alone, Tommen snoring lightly against her knee, brave little mouse, Cersei placed her hands lightly on the arms of the throne and let their weight steady her. The stone under the carpet remembered fires 100 years old. "Fetch Joffrey," she said, because it was the thing that needed saying next, and she had decided it was not night. "My son should be the first to know." From a lower world where the water was made of knives and smoke was an idea, Davos Seaworth clung to a spar and tried to recall the names of his sons. He could call them to mind only by their injuries. Allard with the down on his lip, Mathos with ink on his fingers, Dale with the scar across his thumb where he had tried a new knot and found it uncooperative, Merrick with eyes set a little too far apart so that he always looked as if he were studying a map no one else could see. He had told himself years ago he would stop at 7, as if the Lord of Light or the Father above were counting and would check his numbers, and then a fever had taken his wife's next and he had been angry at his own superstition for days, as if arithmetic were to blame. The thought clawed at him now uselessly, like a cat without claws, and drifted away. The spar under his chest hissed where its paint touched green fire. Davos kicked, pushed off, found another piece of something that wanted to die less quickly than he did. Clung. He tried to take a breath and discovered why breath had been kept in the first place. He coughed until his ribs were a rack. Someone shouted above him in a tongue he had no time to discover. He shut his eyes and opened them. The river was as bright as a street at noon in Myr. Bright, and yet the light was the color of sickness. It had form, the light which offended him. Light should not have shape like fruit and leaf. He watched a man dive from a burning deck as if the air were water and the water air, and then simply catch fire like a thought that was too obvious to belong to him. "Mother," he said, without intending to, and tasted brine. At length the world tilted and became carriageable. A line bumped his shoulder, and then his neck, and then slid under his arms, and hands in the dark of the blaze hauled him onto a deck that belonged to Salad Horsan, as too many other things did. The Lysine looked down at him with the mild satisfaction of a man who has been waiting to be owed. "My onion," Salad Horse said in a voice smooth as a rich man's patting a dog. "You are singed." "In places," Davos managed. "The places you need most, I trust, have not burned away. We shall see. I had almost given you to your god." "Your god? He does not care for contracts." "I have no god," Davos said without heat, because heat would have been impolite to the men tending the other survivors with buckets and blankets and cups. "Only a king." Saladhor's smile widened by a coin. "Ah, well, he has been given a god, then." Red Woman burned all sorts of things on her altars, and the smell is still in my sailcloth. His voice dropped slightly. "Black time for your king tonight, old friend." Davos coughed and saw lights on the south bank moving like thought. The chain, he thought. The small man did it. He did not hate the small man. He did not plan his death. There was a man you killed because he stood between you and your lord's law, and there was a man you killed because you could think of nothing else to do that morning. He would rather not kill the one who had made the river cunning because he had a certain meanness in him that Davos recognized and found honest. He lay back against the coil of rope and looked up at a sky that had found new stars and then unmade them. Saladhor's ship rolled. "They say," the Lysine murmured like a riddle told backhand, "that the old lion is dead." Davos did not know for a moment which old lion he meant, and then did not trust his breath. "Tywin Lannister," he said, to see if his own mouth could make the words without choking. The Lysine nodded, and the nod was both serious and unserious. "Crushed, trampled, burned. Which tale depends on whose coin buys the telling. I am told by 3 men who swear upon Nazarene's left breast that they saw him walk on water to reach a horse that was not there, and fall beneath a thing the color of envy. I am told by 2 that his own men killed him out of scorn, for he told them to go where they did not wish to go. I am told by 1 that he burst like a bladder in a lane. I believe none of them and all of them, because the lion has ceased to make his own tale." He watched Davos with lazy intelligence. "A hole that makes very profitable holes sometimes." Davos shut his eyes. "You have built a city on sand," he wanted to say to Stannis Baratheon. "The same waves will fill the same footprints each tide. But men loved straight lines and punishment, and his king was a man. There is the castle yet," he said, "Dragonstone, and the Stormlands, if they remember where they kneel." "They will remember," Saladhor said cheerfully. "They will remember your king's strictness with fondness now that there is a larger strictness in the world. Come, you have worship to perform." He looked toward the ring of boats that had gathered their wounded. "You may tell your king that the sea does great favors at times, and prefers not to be thanked. I have saved enough of you to embarrass my deck. He may pay me in smiles and piety." When Davos stood before Stannis the next day, the king had the look of a man who had learned to be his own scaffold. He had shaved. He wore black as if mourning were a habit you could put on and take off again, and perhaps it was. The Red Woman stood behind him, her eyes the color of new blood under a thin skin. She smelled of smoke. She had not had to be shown the way onto the ship. 7 sons, Stannis said, and Davos was glad he did not have to say the number first. 7. 6 now, Davos said, "if it please your grace." "Nothing about it pleases me," Stannis said. He did not move. He seemed to have shed the last few inches of flesh a man uses to hide his bones. "Tywin Lannister is dead." "So they say," Davos said carefully. "So they say." Stannis's mouth made a line that did not know jokes when it saw them. "A true king must believe what is useful. It is useful to believe that Lord Tywin is dead. The city still stands." His eyes, iron-shot, flicked past Davos to Melisandre. "The fire cleanses imperfectly. Too much water in that river. Water will always betray you. Your grace, Melisandre murmured. Her voice made the word a promise instead of an address. The Lord of Light has taken your enemy's greatest strength and turned it to ash. His arrogance brought him to the river at an hour of his own choosing. His horse reared in the face of the true flame. The shadow of his house is less. The tide rises in your favor. I saw the green fire, Stannis said. I saw men burn beneath it and heard them call upon gods who did not answer. If your lord did this, he is cruel. All lords are cruel, Melisandre said. And all mercy belongs to one master. She smiled at Davos in that way she had, as if he were wood that would burn sweet. You live. That is mercy for you. I live, Davos agreed, not in gratitude. If there is mercy in it, it is for some other man. I am only the one who receives it. He felt his rag of patience revel and caught it with both hands. Your grace, the city will be fractious with the old lion gone. If you are to wear the thing you were born to wear, we must take the river quickly again, before they braid their roses around it. The roses, Stannis repeated, and the words sounded like a distaste he had discovered in his own mouth. I am told a Tyrell laughed. He blinked hard, as if to clear grit. We will not laugh. We will not dance. We will burn. But not today. Today my Lord of Storms end chews at his bread without salt. Today ships must be counted and men. Today the wind does not choose us. Tomorrow I will make it choose. Davos swallowed. The green had burned his throat raw and the red would not soothe it. As your grace commands. Stannis turned away. Melisandre did not. A father is fallen, she said softly, as if repeating a line of prayer. The way clears for the sons. Where one light dies, another may be fed. We will need king's blood. Davos shut his eyes because his eyes were his own and no god asked for them yet. In the morning light that lay pale and empty on the city, Sansa walked through the godswood and listened to other people's prayers. There were not many of them. King's Landing did not love the old trees, but the few who came made so much noise with their hoping that the leaves might as well have been hung with bells. A woman in a faded blue cloak held her hands up and shook as if she were cold, though the light was already warm. A boy with a face more pimples than skin prayed out loud for a girl to look at him. An old man wandered among the half-hearted oaks and talked to a dead son as if the boy were behind the next trunk and only shy. There were no heart trees here, not real ones, only a willow with a trunk pale enough to pretend. Sansa sat where the gardeners had placed a stone bench to suggest piety, and folded her hands in her lap like a portrait. She had learned to let her eyes rest a little unfocused so that people thought she had drifted into feeling. You could hide a great many thoughts behind that look. The day after the battle, the city creaked like a ship settling. Its timbers had survived the storm, but not without complaint. The men with ladders who came to hang the antlermen found that many antlermen had flown the night before into stinking lanes and been caught by other men with hunger in their faces. So they hung those instead where they found them and wrote names on bits of card in hands too ill to read. Workshops opened their shutters because coins still liked to clink. Bread lines began. The ragpickers did a brisk trade down by the river, bringing up things that were not rags and were not trade but would pass for both if you were not prissy about smells. Sansa had dreamt of a green sea that reached up streets like tongues and licked doorways clean. She had dreamt of a white horse falling. When she woke, her lace cuff was damp where she had bitten it, and the pattern on her palm had pressed into her cheek and made an embroidery there that took an hour to fade. Shay had brushed her hair as if it were rope and told her very sternly not to look in certain directions when they walked because a girl should not see such trinkets. Sansa had not intended to look. That was not the sort of girl she was. The city had its intentions too. She heard him before she saw him. Leather that did not wish to be quiet, a limp because one boot had a stone in it or because the man wore an injury like a habit, a breath that belonged to someone who had learned to breathe while running. When Tyrion came into the godswood, he had a bandage that gave his face the shape of a badly wrapped gift, and his hair had the shocked look of hair that had been recently near a blade. He moved as if each step were an argument he had decided to lose. "Lady Sansa," he said. His voice had lost a certain grace. He sounded like a man who had screamed a clever remark at a crowd and been ignored. He lowered himself onto the other end of the bench and sighed through his nose. "You look well." "I am well," Sansa said. She had practiced that answer in so many rooms. "The city has been saved." "Why is it," Tyrion asked the Willow, "that whenever a Lannister saves a city, the city hates him more for it? The singers will praise your father," Sansa heard herself say, and then colored as if she had been struck, because he lifted his eyes, slowly, and showed her he was a man and not a story. You meant that Tywin Lannister possesses more rhyme than Tyrion," he said, not unkindly. "You are not wrong. He possessed much that I do not. Gravitas, a willingness to be loved by men who wanted to stand in his shade and be taller for it. He possessed." He set his hand on the bench as if the wood were a map of something he could still claim. "He possessed the ability to be alive yesterday." Sansa folded her hands tighter so that the knuckles showed. "I am sorry," she said, because it seemed to be a currency one paid on such occasions, and also because some part of her was. "I am too," Tyrion said, and let his head fall back. "For myself, a little. For the city, more. For my sister." He laughed as at a jest that might yet turn out too cruel to tell. "I do not know what I feel for my sister. Fear dresses itself as respect when it wishes to be sold at court. Perhaps I shall buy a new dress." Sansa looked at him sidelong. "It is said the roses will wreath the throne now. They brought food. People say such things." "They do," he agreed. "And the roses have thorns as long as fingers. A good hedge for a throne to hide behind. Our dear Queen Regent does not care for hedges between her and the world does not care for her when she is without hedges. There will be a compromise, and everyone will call it victory." He rubbed his bandaged cheek gently, as if deciding who owned the pain. "They mean to wed your betrothed to a flower." Sansa felt the blood leave her face obediently. She tried to imagine Joffrey in a wreath and failed because all the wreaths turned to crowns, and then to claws. "I am betrothed to the king." "So you are," Tyrion said. He studied the willow. "The law is a narrow bridge made of slippery wood, Lady Sansa. One may cross it without falling into the river if one keeps very still and remembers to breathe evenly. One may also choose the river." She thought of a man standing in a doorway and offering his cloak, and of how he had smelled of steel and horse and rain and something else that was not fear and not courage but some compromise between them. She had been offered a river once. She had refused it because she did not know how to swim. "I did not come to frighten you," Tyrion said, and for once she believed him entirely. "I came because it is a day for telling truths that will not be wanted later. I will be stripped of something, name, office, skin perhaps. It is in my sister's nature to strip. If I should leave you unadvised, you might think me unkind. And I rather like your kindness, Lady Sansa, for it is rare in this house." "What would you advise?" she asked, and kept her eyes on her fingers because it was easier to think about their folding than about anything else. "That you resist the impulse to pray for anything," Tyrion said. "The gods are disreputable creditors. Pay them attention and they immediately think themselves owed. Better to watch, better to listen, better to learn where the doors are. You would be surprised how many rooms in this city have doors that everyone pretends are walls." He pushed himself up, wincing. "I go to be told whether my usefulness has been redeemed by having arranged my father's death." He glanced at her to see whether she would blink. She had learned not to. He smiled, crooked and tired. "Oh, I do not flatter myself with so much agency, but it will please someone to say it and someone to hear it, and I will be available to be blamed. We all perform." When he had gone, Sansa sat very still on the bench and thought of doors. She thought of one in her own small chamber that led to stairs used by servants who sang to themselves when they carried kindling and believed no lady could hear. She thought of one in the September where the candles were kept, leading into a corridor that smelled of bees and wax and secrets. She thought of one in the red keep that she did not know, but might, if she learned to let her eyes miss their focus more often, appear to her like a kindness. In the Tower of the Hand, the rushes had not yet been renewed. Varys picked a straw from the hem of his gown and examined it as mournfully as if it were a small and loyal servant he was about to dismiss. "Such untidiness," he murmured. "It gives the wrong impression. One likes a little disorder, to be sure. It keeps men from believing that all is arranged by invisible hands, but too much makes them despair of arrangement altogether." "Is there any arrangement left?" Lord Peter Baelish asked, and showed his teeth like a gentleman for whom teeth were an accessory. He had dust on his shoes as if he had been moving quickly. The dust matched his lace. It was a neat trick. "One hears a great deal about lions losing their heads. I had not thought to be present at a mounting of the skull on a spike ourselves." "There will be no spike," Cersei said. She stood by the window where the light was good. It did nothing for her. She had slept not at all and had put on a gown the color of ripe cherries and found it sat wrong on her shoulders, as if it would have looked better on a younger woman, and then had been furious at cloth for its insolence. "My father will lie with his fathers when I have put this city in order." "Your father," Varys said softly, "put this city in order." "My father," Cersei said, "did not live forever. It surprises me that this surprises anyone. The world is full of men who forget that fathers die. He died making the world remember." Peter Baelish admired the corner of the room where dust had caught and made patterns like maps. "It is a most interesting world when it remembers," he said. "One hears that Lord Tyrell presses to be granted the gratitude of the realm in a manner suited to his appetite." "He wishes to see his daughter on the throne," Cersei said. "He will be disappointed." "It is difficult to disappoint the Lord of Highgarden," Varys said mildly. "He merely smiles and suggests a tournament, and all are pleased again. His mother, on the other hand—" "His mother is a viper in a cap," Cersei said. "Let her hiss. I am queen. My son is king. My son is not a trinket to be exchanged for bread." "Bread?" Peter murmured, as if about to make a joke and then thinking better of it. "The city has eaten fire and smoke. It might enjoy something more substantial. The barges from the Mander make a pretty sight when they come round the headland. Green hills on the water." Cersei looked at him, and he looked back with such blank politeness that she remembered, suddenly and unkindly, what a man like him would have looked like as a boy. Eyes always slightly downcast, voice clean, hands clever because they had to be, always the one to fetch and carry at a lordling's table because he knew to do it invisibly. She had no patience for such men, but they fetched and carried things no one else could smell. "You wish to tell me we will starve if I do not let them pluck my son like a rosehip." "I wish to tell you," Baelish said, "that I am admirably placed to speak to Lord Tyrell and his mother, and to arrange that the plucking is done with a gentle hand and for a more ornamental purpose. In some parts of the Reach they make a wine of rose petals. It is very sweet, and one can drink a great deal of it before realizing one has been made ridiculous. Allow me to find a bottle." "Arrange," Varys murmured, as if tasting a word he had chewed too often. "When men of the Reach arrange matters, things tend to reproduce." "Let him arrange," Cersei said sharply. "Let him compose a scene in which Marjorie holds flowers and my son holds a sword and the city holds its breath. Afterward we will see who breathes out. Littlefinger, you will go to Bitterbridge and bleed them with smiles. Promise what we must. We will give them a wedding. And then," she added, and allowed herself a small scissor of a smile, "we will remember that there is but one queen in the city." "I take my leave with pleasure," Peter said, and managed to make the leaving itself look like a courtesy to the room. When he had gone, the air in the chamber moved again, as if he had been blocking a window. Varys watched the door for a moment longer than manners required, as if expecting it to do a trick. Then he folded his plump fingers and said, "Your grace is formidable in grief." "I am not grieving," Cersei said. "No?" Varys smiled. It was soft as a shuffle of paper. "How fortunate." When Jaime learned his father was dead, he was a captive in a tower that pretended to civility by airing its rushes twice a month and by not letting the rats into the bed. He had not looked at his hand in 3 hours. He had found that if he did not look at it, it neither burned nor itched nor wished to be someone else's. He had practiced not looking with an attention he had never given to sermons as a boy. "You cannot be serious," he said, when Edmure Tully's man told him the tale as if he had some right to it. "My father does not die near rivers. He makes rivers go round him." "The Blackwater is no river for making," the man said. He had the earnest look of a steward and the smell of a boy who had not yet learned dignity. "It is a sea's mouth, takes what is thrown into it. They will have to fish him from it, if he went where they say." Jamie pictured a hook biting into his father's cheek and found himself somewhere between laughter and vomit. "You are dismissed," he said, because there was nobility in dismissing people that hurt you with their information. When the door closed, he looked at his hand for a long time because he could not help it. It sat there at the end of his arm, behaving like a hand. He did not trust it. He thought of Cersei. He thought of a boy with his name and his hair and his throne and no father. He thought of Tyrion. He thought of a small figure bending over a table in a tent to play with little painted men, moving them not as a child moves toys to make the sound of battle with his mouth, but as a clerk moves tallies in a ledger and makes debt cancel debt. He thought that perhaps his brother had killed his father with green fire because his brother could do such things by touching a rope and saying a sentence he had set aside and practiced in his mind. He thought that if Tyrion had killed their father, it would have been by accident because the world disliked neat endings. He lay back and looked at the ceiling and wondered if there were gods nearby and if they were enjoying the way his thoughts crawled across one another like ants on a bit of meat. Elsewhere, in a solar at the manse the Tyrells had claimed because it had windows that day liked and tapestries you could look at without thinking of winter, Olenna Redwine plucked at a grape and found fault with it. "I do not care for fruit in this city," she said. "It tastes of business. In the Reach a grape tastes of sun, and what the sun feels about you is no one else's affair. Here a grape tastes of whether a man has been seen with the wrong woman. It tastes of being spied upon by cats." Marjorie smiled dutifully. She had done a great deal of duty in the last day. "We will bring our own fruit when we come," she said. "We will teach them grace." "You will teach them to look at you," Olenna said dryly. "That is your skill. It will do. Keep your cousins from eating with their fingers at supper, and perhaps we will be thought civil." She leaned forward, the better to prod her granddaughter's calm like a cat prods a beetle to make sure it still moves. "He is a boy," she said, and did not make the word a compliment. "He is a boy with a mother who thinks herself necessary. I have known such boys. They become men of one of two kinds, and the transition kills more people than it ought. Can you make him look at you as if you are both a woman and a mother?" "I can make him look," Marjorie said, and allowed herself a little standard smile because it was appropriate to show her grandmother that she had rehearsed for these lines. "I cannot make him see. The seeing is not my task." "Good." Olenna popped the grape into her mouth. "We will see that the girl with the red hair is kept nearby for politeness and not too nearby for folly. I once knew a queen who allowed her son's fancy to make treaties for her. It does not make good bread. Speaking of bread, where are the barges? I am tired of the smell of fish in my breakfast." The barges would come. The thrones and swords and roses would come. The gold would come and the letters. The city waited for all of it like a woman between pains, knowing that what came next would be louder and less dignified and more necessary. It had survived a night. It had woken to a morning where the birds had the bad taste to sing. It would go on. The dead lion would lie like a story in a room where men went to remember being small. The living would jostle for the chair that ate men's backs. The river would keep its taste. And under the Red Keep, where the stones had learned to whisper to one another and had learned that it was best to do so only when no one listened, a rat ran along a ledge and paused to sniff. It had found a bit of meat that might once have been someone's cleverness. It ate carefully and did not choke. Above it, the city exhaled and drew another breath, and the air tasted faintly, faintly of copper and roses. On the second morning, the light came late, as if it had stopped at the river to look for itself. In the paler hours before it, men with long poles prodded the Blackwater's edge and found the river returned their prodding with a sucking laugh. Hooks bit timbers, ropes went hard as grudges, planks shrieked like gulls, and the long dark bellies of galleys lay upturned in the reeds with weeds in their teeth. Children ran along the quays to point at the things the water had chosen to give back. A wheel from a cart, a mast that stuck up like a prayer with no throat to carry it, a hand still wearing a ring, the ring as bright as if it had just been praised. The green was gone from the surface, mostly. It showed itself only in sly seams along the stones, the thin whisper of a stain that would not be scrubbed out with salt or lye, a reminder that some fires do not live in wood alone. Tyrion woke to that light and to the knowledge that his left cheek belonged to a stranger. When he took breath, the bandage lifted and lay back again with the stubbornness of tired skin. When he swallowed, a thread of ache climbed his jaw like a beggar using a step. Podrick had a way of appearing just after Payne had asked for a witness, silent and square, with a basin he hadn't been told to fetch. The boy's hands were clean and always a little damp, as if he meant to be ready to touch the world without leaving marks. "Drink," Podrick said, which was not a question in the same way that life was not, and lifted the cup carefully enough that Tyrion did not have to look at the shaking. The maester had burned something under his nose in the night to send the pain walking a corridor without doors. It had found its way back. Tyrion considered congratulating it and did not, because cleverness when spoken into a room that contained only a boy and a jug of water had learned to sound like vanity. He drank. The water had one of the city's many flavors. Today it tasted of horses. He found this comforting. It meant that the city still had horses. "Any visitors?" he asked. The question came out of a mouth full of wool, but a mouth that could form questions could carry on pretending it belonged to a lord. Pod looked at the door as if it might contradict him. "Lord Varys," he said. "He was quiet. He practices." Tyrion eased himself upright, then stopped because the world had shifted a little to one side and he did not like having to find his feet somewhere new. Did the spider bring a web or only news? He said he had both, Pod offered, which was as much as anyone ever said about Varys if they valued continuing to be a person. "Fetch him, then," Tyrion said. When Pod reached the door, Tyrion added, because someone needed to say it and no one had yet. "And Pod." There was a moment on the quay where a very fine knight decided the king would have fewer uncles if he moved his sword in a certain direction. "You made a disagreeable choice on my behalf. It will likely encourage you to more disagreeable choices. Keep at it." Pod blinked at the floor, then at the wall, then at the slit of the window where the light lay. "Yes, my lord," he said, with the solemnity of a boy who had not discovered how few times the world allowed him to say yes. He went. Varys came with the smell of soap, which always made Tyrion suspect him. The eunuch moved as if his bones had been taught manners by a dance master, and his hands steepled themselves as if they meant to pray to one another in private later. He stood half in the light and half out of it and was soft in both places. "My dear," he said, "you do the bandage great credit." "I meant to impress it," Tyrion said. "A man must keep his standards." "Quite so." Varys's eyes drifted toward the window, where the river showed itself in a bright slit and then looked away. "This city has a new color. I do not know if it suits her." "Cities," Tyrion said, "take to any color if there is bread under it." He touched the edge of the bandage where it rubbed the tender place along his jaw and pretended it did not make him want to swear. "Is there bread?" "There will be," Varys said. "Mander barges find their way as vines do. The Tyrells are as advertised. Bountiful where it pleases them, poisonous where it suits." "Wreaths, then," Tyrion said, "for our throne. And the lion." He kept his eyes on Varys's soft face because the window had begun to be dangerous with its insistence on distance. "I hear there are songs already. Songs are always so prompt to give death an occupation." "Lord Tywin is beyond employment," Varys murmured. He was brought in by men with arms like lantern poles, and his face did not say anything at all. Men have been practicing not listening to it for many years. Now they will simply stop. "My sister, Queen Regent Cersei, is herself writ large," Varys said. "She eats anger with her wine and then finds she has less appetite after. She has summoned Lord Kevin." "Good," Tyrion said, and meant it. because Kevin had the dull virtues that keep roofs from leaking and make men who prefer stories impatient. He'll keep the house from wandering into the river out of pride. He will also suggest that I be returned to the gutter. The suggestion will not be fashionable, but it will be practical. Fashion and practicality are to be wed, Varys said. Lord Peter is to court them. Bitterbridge suits him, Tyrion murmured. He pictured Littlefinger among courtiers in hues soft as fruit, smiling as if he had been asked a question only he could hear. He'll make himself the lace on the wedding garment, and then sell thread. Varys smiled the way a priest smiles when reminded that the gods are not tidy. I like you, he said. It is an old habit. There are so many new habits one must acquire at court that one clings to the few that give the illusion of having been chosen. Still, choice is a poor cloak. I would advise you to find thicker cloth. Advice, Tyrion said languidly, is a cloak one must buy from those who are not wearing it. Varys folded his hands, unfolding them again, as if reminding them that they were not meant to keep secrets from him. There is a girl in this castle who is a bridge, he said. One might cross her and come out on a safer shore, or one might throw stones at her and find the river has moved in the night. The Tyrells will wish to cross. Your sister will wish to own. Your father would have burned the bridge and forced a ford. And I? Tyrion asked. Because he had woken on a stone, he did not trust, and it soothed him to be told that it was indeed stone. You will try to put railings on it, Varys said, eyes warm, and discover that hands more often grip to push than to avoid falling. He let the smile linger long enough for them both to admire its restraint, then allowed it to leave. There is also a singer, and a drunken knight, and a ship with a captain who sells patience at a profit. These are small doors. Sometimes small doors are all that will admit one. Tell the singer to practice silence, Tyrion said. Tell the knight to practice being sober. As to the ship, he caught his breath, which had run up and down the stairs without his permission. He should practice waiting beyond the sight of customs men. Varys bowed with his eyes and not his back. I shall tell them all what they will not be told, he said. At the door he paused, one hand on the latch as if testing whether the wood remembered him. The city will hold a funeral. Your sister will want a procession worthy of memory. She will wish this not only because she loved her father in the way that wolves love meat, but because processions teach city stones how to knee. He half-turned. You should go. When people count who stood where, they will do more arithmetic than they mean to. I have never discouraged arithmetic, Tyrion said, and when Varys had gone, Tyrion lay back and closed his eyes and allowed the room to be a boat again and himself a piece of cargo within it. In the Queen's solar, a seamstress held her breath as she pinned, as if the pin were a dagger and the gown were a rival about to move and spoil her thrust. The gown was the color of bruised grapes. Cersei had chosen it because it told the truth. She stood very still because stillness had become her talent. When she breathed, it was inside the gown, and the gown made no comment. Outside the gown, the room was a hive full of women and their necessary lies. Your Grace, said a little voice, and Cersei did not look because she knew the voice by heart. Tommen held a wooden lion that had belonged to Joffrey and to herself and to a half-dozen princes before that, and would go on belonging to small hands until the wood wore thin enough to let secrets out. His hair had been combed, and someone had kissed his forehead, and he still looked like a boy in a room where women would not let the air he breathed have any edges. You will wear the black, she said without turning, because the seamstress had a pin positioned over a rib that did not enjoy commentary. There is a very fine doublet. Ser Osmond will ensure your sword is polished. I do not like the black, Tommen said, and Cersei permitted herself half a glance. His mouth trembled as if he had a word in it that would not be born. You will like what your people like, Cersei said, softly so that the seamstress did not have to flinch. Today they will like you grieving. Will I see grandfather? Tommen asked. He looked past the seamstress and the sisters and the gown on its stand and tried to find a place in the room that would be proof against looking. You will see the cloth, Cersei said. She breathed and the seamstress pin decided to spare her flesh after all. You will see the banners and the swords and the men who forget how to walk when there are banners. Grandfather is where men who made a city kneel go. You will not look there." She reached and touched his hair. It was clean. "Where is Joffrey?" "He is with Ser Boros," a maidservant said to a cushion, not daring to say it to the queen. "He asked for the crossbow." "He is not to take it to the September," Cersei said. "He is not to take it to the steps." She lifted her chin, and the seamstress stepped back in admiration or terror. "Send for him." When Joffrey came, he had put on his best boy's face, the one that belonged to a painted panel and not to a person. He made a bow that mocked all bows by being performed perfectly. The crossbow was nowhere to be seen, which meant it was in the room where he had left it. He went to his brother and touched his shoulder as if the touch were a favor to the wood of the lion. "You will not cry," he said. "I am not crying," Tommen said, and was. "Your men will think you weak." "They are your men," Tommen answered, with a sideways bravery that made Cersei's mouth want to do something that would have looked like pride if the seamstress had not been watching. "They are ours," she said. "Put on the black. The city will look and tell itself a story. It is our task to know which story it is telling." Kevin arrived with dust from the road in the creases of his clothes, which meant he had not stopped to change into something that made him look more necessary. He bowed and then did not remain bent. Cersei admired him for this at the same time she resented having to admire anything. She dismissed the women with a flick of her fingers. They went in folds and rustles and whispers, leaving the room larger by the amount of their silence. "Niece," Kevin said, "you are too pale." "I am the moon over this city," she said. "It needs pale light." She gestured, and a servant who hovered near the door, as if he were a candle flame given legs, poured wine. Kevin did not drink. "You are come to tell me what must be done." "I am come to be asked," Kevin said, "and possibly refused." "You would have been a good hand," Cersei said, and watched his face. He did not change it, which was his way of answering yes. "You will be a good hand." "No," Kevin said. He said it as if it were a weight he had been promised and found he could not lift without insulting the dead by letting it fall. "You do not wish a hand. You wish a pair of gloves. I will not put my hands in and pretend they are mine." "My father," she began, and he cut her off without movement. "Your father used me where I could be of use and left the room when I would have contradicted him loudly enough to turn approval to obstinacy. He knew how to perform power in rooms. You know how to perform power in mirrors. They are different arts and both are necessary. Let me be where I am necessary. Let Lannisport mourn in the way it knows. Let the Rock be told a Lannister keeps count. Send me. Appoint another man to sit in that chair and be broken by it. If you send me, you will have a brother and not a clerk." He watched her. He was too decent to watch too long. "If you do not send me, I will go." "You threaten me," Cersei said lightly, as if he had offered her a second gown when she had already chosen one. "I love you," Kevin said, "and I know where love ends." He straightened his cloak, which had acquired a tear from a careless bush. "Lord Tyrell will ask for the small coin and the large. He will ask with a smile and a story of wheat. He will bring goats on barges and call them lambs. I can keep count. You do not need me to bend my back under the chair to keep count. Find a man you can forgive for contradicting you. Failing that, find a man you can endure in silence." Cersei lifted her cup and tasted the wine and discovered it was meek. "You will go to the Rock," she said. "You will tell them that the lion roared even while dying. You will tell them that he took the river in his teeth and shook it. You will tell them that his cub sits the throne." "I will tell them," Kevin said, "and I will tell them to send men who know the difference between holding a wall and holding a woman." He bowed again, deeper now. "I grieve with you." "Grieve quickly," Cersei said. "We have only so many hours where grief is a coin and not a chain." The procession from the Red Keep to Baelor September taught the cobbles the shape of sorrow and the men the weight of discipline. Gold cloaks lined the route and had the good sense to look as if they had been carved that way. The city crowded around them. The the small folks' hungry eyes widening at the sight of tapestries unrolled to show the old lion in chase and in feasting, and in a hall where all the light came from his hair. They threw flowers because flowers are cheaper than bread and float longer. They crossed themselves or did not according to how their mothers had taught them. They made a low sound that traveled along the street like a cloth being shaken. Joffrey rode as a boy who had been told he was a king and had discovered that he could believe it more entirely if he made others do so, too. He sat straight. He smiled when the noise swelled, and when it dipped he frowned, as if the city had failed him by breathing unevenly. Tommen looked straight ahead and remembered his mother's injunction. The tears that stood in his eyes sat in the corner and behaved themselves. Cersei did not look at the crowd. She looked at the September, which grew larger as they approached, and never grew large enough. Marjorie Tyrell waited before the steps with a veil at her hair, and her grandmother behind her in a shawl that had seen 3 kings kneel and had not been impressed. The Reachmen wore their summer on their sleeves. Their green was a statement, their silver thread a rumor. When the bier came to the foot of the steps, Marjorie lowered her head just the degree that told all eyes what they needed to see. Joffrey's mouth tightened, then relaxed when the crowd sighed as one at the picture they made. Within the September, the air had been washed in incense and old dust. The stranger looked down from his painted window with an expression that allowed everyone to imagine that they were not seen. The 7-pointed star lay open in Pycelle's hands like a bird that had forgotten why it had been born. Varys's face in the shadows looked like a question. Peter Baelish was not there to watch his own absence be spoken of in whispers. Ser Loras stood like an image of a knight carved from the idea girl's head of honor. When Joffrey and Cersei and Tommen approached the bier, Sansa was in their train, at the angle in a picture where a painter with an honest hand would have put a cat. When it was over, when the prayers that had not reached Tywin in life had been recited for him in death, when the bells had sung of a man who would not have listened to them when he could have ordered them rung differently, when the Silent Sisters had done their duty so completely that they had become the room, the city resumed its mutter. Outside, the sun had at last decided to claim the day from the smoke, and the steps were a shallow lake of light. Marjorie sat a half-moment too long upon the top step, and the city saw that she had done so and was pleased to have seen something. When she rose, she came down 3 steps to meet Joffrey with a softness that made her look as if she were walking into a summer she had already learned by heart. "Your Grace," she said, and there was nothing else in the phrase but honor and a delicate promise to be agreeable. "My lady," Joffrey said. He took her hand, held it a moment longer than courtesy would call for, and then released it to show that he was not bound by hands. "Grandmother begs leave to offer her respects in private," Marjorie said. "She knows how to be old, which is a skill that takes practice. She would be honored to rest a moment in your mother's solar later, when the city has finished its looking." "My mother will decide," Joffrey said, because he had learned that answers of that kind sounded like authority. "I would have you see the yard. The men will tilt in my grandfather's honor." "They will look very fine," Marjorie said, and let her eyes widen the smallest degree to show appreciation, as if it were a coin she had been saving just for this. Sansa felt the world shift at the edge of that exchange. She could not have said what had moved. It was like a breeze in a tapestried hall. The picture stirs, and you are certain something within it has changed, though the horse still rears and the ladies still lift their hands. She looked down the steps and saw Ser Dantos between 2 pillars, his clothes careful disarray, his face that particular drunk sobriety that announces it is about to ask for a favor of someone it swears it loves. Her stomach made a small, carefully voiced objection to being required to be part of her. She kept her eyes on Marjorie's veil and made no sign. Later, in the cool place behind the September where the acolyte's sandals made a whisper of leather on worn stone, she let herself breathe in small gulps. The lions in the colored glass threw patches of gold onto the floor, put halos where they were not deserved, asked nothing. The sound of the city's admiration for its procession was muffled here, as if justice had remembered to shut its door. "Child," Ser Dantos whispered, because he would never call her by her name when he could use a smaller word that made him feel he kept something. "You shone like a candle among dull lamps." "You are kind," Sansa said automatically, and wished she did not have to be so often. "I am at last what I was meant to be," he said. "A fool who serves. I have friends on the water who have a way of making absence look like accident. When the roses have wrapped themselves around the castle, there will be a moment where a thorn is needed elsewhere. You will feel it, little bird. You will know. Then you will come out into the dark, and the dark will be a door." His breath smelled of wine and of a determination to be useful. "There is a ship." "There are many ships," Sansa said, and hoped her voice did not shake on the edge of the wish. "Only one is yours," Dantos murmured. "Listen for it. It will speak your name. Do not tell me whether you believe me. Belief is a thing better practiced alone." His hand twitched as if it wanted to touch hers and reconsidered because it had touched too many things already. He bowed with clumsy gravity and went, rolling his shoulders as if he were bearing the room out on them. When she came into the light again, the yard had already filled with knights and half-knights and men who wore the memory of knighthood and meant to retrieve it by the application of a lance to a target. Joffrey stood beneath a canopy as if the canopy had proposed marriage. Cersei sat at his left, not smiling. At his right sat the girl who fed the city's hunger for a story it could tell itself in the market while cutting bread thinner to make it last. Sansa took her place behind them in the row of women and told herself to turn her head when the crowd did, to widen her eyes when they widened theirs, to be the picture they had all agreed she was. Meanwhile the river ran, and at an island of stone that men had the presumption to call a castle because it sat on rock rather than mud, Stannis Baratheon learned the shape of the word after. It had no color and all the weight. He wore black and a face that had been instructed to be made of iron. The Red Woman stood beside him with her hands folded on nothing. Davos thought that a neat trick. He would have admired it if his sons were alive to hear him do so. He loved his king and hated the woman. Love was a squat, serviceable feeling that knew the price of salt and the weather's ways and remembered the faces of oarsmen who had not come back. Hate was clean and clear and cold like a knife kept in a basin of snow. He had brought his knife to the woman and found that snow melts where certain fires are kept. He had lain in a cell and counted the stones with a fisherman's patience, and when Stannis came to him in the dark with the smell of smoke in his beard, Davos had said the truest thing he had. "I am sorry for your loss," he had said, and Stannis had not thrown him to the sea for it. "I have fewer men than a lord of middling means," Stannis said now, standing before a fire that he had not made or asked for. "I have fewer ships than a Lysine pirate of middling honesty. I have fewer friends than a gambler who speaks when he should swallow. What I have I will use." "Use me," Davos said, because he had no other coin. "Not as a candle to be burned on a god's table. As a man who has two hands still because the sea did not take them, and a tongue that can be made to tell the truth when it is told to." "You kept your knife," Stannis observed, as if the knife were the interesting thing and not the hand that had been brave enough to take it up and stupid enough to be caught with it. "I did," Davos said. "When I can throw it at the right throat, your grace, I will do so and tell you I am sorry afterward or not, as the case may be." Melisandre's eyes had a talent for being warm without giving any heat to the room. "The right throat is before you," she said mildly. "You could spare yourself the labor of waiting." Davos did not look at her because the last time he had, the room had gone very red for a while and he had had to learn to be a man again from the knees up. "I have sons still," he said. "They are in their mothers' bellies or in the cockles' huts or in other men's boats. I have sons still because I have to call them by their names or I will go into the sea and not bother to climb back onto anything. You ask your God for fire. I ask mine for a fair wind. One of us will be answered. It will be me." Stannis's mouth made that small motion it made when he had heard something he would allow to be true later. He set a hand on the chair that had belonged to men who had not deserved a king and said, "Bring me the boy." Edric came like a thought you had been putting off. His hair shone as if light had decided to inhabit it out of curiosity. He was green enough to bow without looking at whom he bowed to, and careful enough to keep his eyes on the floor until he was told he might lift them. Davos looked at him and saw a dozen other boys with hair less fine and names less bastard than futures that would never involve a throne. He felt his knife where it lay under his belt and wished he had left it in the cell to deprive himself of having to make a choice with it. "I am your king," Stannis said. He did not soften the word any more than he softened any word. "You will be honored by me. You will be used by me. You will be kept or spent as the god makes clear. Do not be afraid." "I am not afraid," Edric lied, which meant he had a chance to live longer than a boy who told the truth would have. Melisandre breathed in as if the boy smelled of something she preferred to wine. "Kings leave seeds where they ought not," she said cheerfully. "The gardener of the world comes with fire to prune." She held out her hand and Edric took it because a boy taught manners must use them even when they lead him into the arm of a woman who spoke like an altar. Davos watched this and counted his breaths and thought of a letter, and of a door in a night-black wall that men called a gate. In time he would sit at a table and write to a man who did not know him with a hand that had held an or more often than it had held a quill, and he would send ravens, and he would go to a place where snow had more authority than kings. But not yet, for now he stood before a fire and did not burn. It was enough. Far from fires, in a room with red stone knees and narrow windows that made the river look like a rumor, Catelyn Stark listened to a debate she had not invited and found that she was the subject of it anyway. Edmure sat at the foot of the dais as if it were a horse he had been made to ride too early and had not forgiven since. The Blackfish stood like a blunt sword that had gone on being sharpened for the pleasure of it, and now looked for something to cut. The news of Tywin's death lay on the table between them like a loaf of bread no one had decided who should cut. "It breaks them," Edmure said, and made his hands into an argument. "They have no father. They have no one to coordinate the marches. The Lannister garrisons will be thinking about whether the next captain in their line owes them money or not. We should move. We should have moved months ago," Brynden said, his mouth making that short impatience with which he made his kindness invisible. "My king needed to be told as much by men who did not wish to tell him other things." Catelyn held her breath until her heart remembered its work. "My son will come," she said. "He will set his banners by the river and watch it, and then he will do what his father would have done if he had had this advantage, which he did not. He will be cautious." "Caution is a virtue in women," the Blackfish said flatly. "It is a vice in kings left with nothing to spend. Robb needs a victory that tastes like meat, not like broth. Tywin dead gives him a knife. Lord Tywin dead gives him a fork," Edmure said, lips twitching under the stress of trying a jest before a man who polished scowls. "Which is to say, it gives him better manners at the table, but not more food." Catelyn felt the thread of patience she had been feeding into herself for days begin to fray. "It gives him a lever," she said. "It gives him a thing that Tywin had used to move lords and now cannot. The phrase will want to be invited to something that looks like a banquet again. They are angry men, but anger can be taught to eat like any appetite. We will speak to them." She turned her face so that the window could have the expression she did not want to show these men. The river's glint could not be trusted. It made everything look wet. "There is another lever." Brynden did not sigh. He was a man who saved sighs for sleeping. "Say it," he said. "Jaime Lannister," she said, and used the name as if it had a right to be in the room. "He is here. We did not lose him in the night to some romantic plan. We have put him in a tower where he has learned to count the stones. Let him go." Edmure stood so quickly that the chair said an unkind word on his behalf. "Let him go." "To fetch my daughters," Catelyn said, because she had learned that the direct line between feeling and speech was the only one that could be crossed in times when men found roads too elaborate. "For Tywin's favor, he would have brought 1,000 men up our stairs by knife. For his daughters' lives, a father will walk alone into a room he imagines full of enemies. I know this because I am my children's mother." "Jaime Lannister," Edmure repeated helplessly, as if she had advocated freeing a wolf and calling it a lamb. "Jaime Lannister," the Blackfish said in the tone of a man weighing fish to be certain he has not been cheated. "The Kingslayer, the Lion's firstborn, the edge that cut the last true king." He looked at his niece, and his eyes softened a degree that other men would have mistaken. And the coin that buys Sansa and Arya if anyone's face can be printed on one side of it. He nodded once, sharp. He will go under escort. He will go under a vow so severe that a priest will need to wash after hearing it. He will go with a sword he may not draw. He will go with a woman who refuses to be anything less than a sword. Brienne, Catelyn said, and felt her mouth shape the name like a prayer that had no god to deliver it. She will not fail me. No, Brynden agreed, and for a moment a small pride straightened his mouth, as if he had made Brienne's shoulders himself. She will not. Jaime laughed when he heard, laughed because he did not have another thing ready to do and because laughter put distance between himself and the thing being asked of him. You will give me a woman, he said to Catelyn, and a road, and a promise that if I return with the wrong birds you will put my head in a basket. How charming. You will bring my daughters, Catelyn said, and did not bother to make the words beat with threat. Or you will bring one and tell me where the other has been sent. Or you will write a letter as you are dying that will make another man move his hand to help a girl, because you have that power even with your blood running out. You will do this because there are people for whom promise is not a game. You ask me to be my father without the courtesy of letting me be alive afterward, he said, and there was a flicker of something wounded and not entirely rotten in his face. You ask a man who breaks oaths for sport to keep one when it suits you. I ask a man who has never had to keep anything, she said quietly, to find out if he can. Brienne stood straight as a tower in a place where the towers had grown timid. In her blue cloak she looked like a slice of clean sky fallen into a river and refusing to take on its color. When she took the vow, she did it without poetry. And the priest's hands shook anyway because he knew that this was a binding he was privileged to witness and less privileged to survive if it went wrong. Jaime smiled at her the way a man smiles at a dog he intends to provoke and found the smile answer itself with a tightening behind his ribs. It irritated him. They left at dusk so that the day would not have to take responsibility for their leaving. The gates of Riverrun let them pass with the same expression with which a careful housewife lets a cat out, hoping it will not bring back something that moves. Brienne rode at Jaime's left and kept herself between him and the river as if she suspected that its hunger was hereditary. Jaime carried nothing but a change of linen and his tongue, which he kept sharp for all occasions. The escort that had been promised them was 2 men and a boy, which amused Jaime until he learned the boy was the one who had watched him sleep in the tower for 2 months and never once coughed. The boy's eyes were like nails, hammered exactly where they belonged. At the ford, the first night, a man in a ragged hat asked them for a coin with the sincerity of a priest ringing for alms. Brienne gave him one with her left hand so that her sword remained free in the right. The man took the coin and looked in her face, and whatever he had meant to try fell out of his hands and broke unseen. He stepped back and watched them pass with the disappointed curiosity of a child denied a trick. "You frighten peasants," Jaime said. "How noble." "I frighten men who hope," Brienne said, "to take what is not offered." She did not turn her head to look at him, which irked him more than he could have predicted. By the 3rd day they had learned the noises the other made in sleep and the rate at which the other ate, and they had not learned anything that made the journey easier. Brienne did not answer insults. She put them aside like rocks to be thrown later when someone else would need a wall. Jaime did not answer courtesy. He swallowed it and found it did not sit well with wine. At a road in that had lost its sign to a fire and kept its name by having no name, they ate bread with onions and called it meat. Men in the corner wore the provided hats of soldiers, which is to say suspicion. One of them had a gold tooth and the habit of playing with it with his tongue. "Where are you bound, maid?" he asked Brienne, and the word had enough grease on it that even the boy who carried their baggage looked up. "Maids do not carry swords," Brienne said, and the man with the gold tooth grinned to show that many people had told him that and he had not believed them yet. "Some do," Jaime said sweetly. "Some marry them." The man's grin contracted into a thin line. "What's behind you, pretty boy?" he asked, ignoring the sword because men who were ready to cause trouble needed to ignore one thing in each room or else would be distracted too often. "Your sister." "A river," Jaime said pleasantly. "All my sisters are rivers." They slept that night with the boy on watch and the two men from Riverrun taking turns whispering to one another about the ways to die that did not involve being blamed for what had happened on their watch. At dawn, Brienne woke Jaime with a hand on his shoulder that had learned from Stone how to be firm without fuss. "We will go by Harrenhal," she said. "Ah," he murmured. "To see Lord Bolton's collection of careful silences? I have heard it is instructive." "There is a bridge," Brienne said. "There are men who will not be looking for us because they are busy congratulating themselves for having learned to watch the wrong road. There is water." She mounted and looked at the world as if she were deciding which parts of it would be allowed to go on being real. "Harrenhal," Jaime said to the horse, which snorted as if insulted without having been called a name. "Why not? If the castle falls on our heads, we can tell stories to the ghosts about how a woman brought me to my father's enemies and a knight didn't die of embarrassment." "Your father is dead," Brienne said, not to hurt, but because she was the kind of woman who scraped plates clean and did not leave bits to rot. Jaime opened his mouth for a jest and found that the line he had meant to say wore a hole where something tender had trickled out. "He will go on being my father," he said, and made it the kind of joke that shuts a door slowly rather than slamming it. In King's Landing, the Tyrells watered the city with coin and the city sprouted loyalties like hardy weeds. Marjorie walked the markets with a veiled basket on her arm and gave bread with a hand that did not tremble and a smile that had learned the trick of making a man think he had been admired for the way he said thank you. She visited a tannery and did not grimace. She walked in a lane where night soil was a presence and not a rumor and did not lift her skirt higher than necessity required. The women loved her with the quick, hungry love of women who have been taught to hate the girls their husbands look at and have been given, at last, a girl they can love together. The men loved her with the hungry love of men who remembered their mothers and wished to be given permission to be boys in the presence of a woman without shame. The children loved her because she had flowers on her sleeves that did not stain their fingers when they touched them, which was to say that the city loved the person it had agreed she was. Olenna sat with Varys in a shady courtyard where the vines had found the lattice and memorized it. She wore a cap that had made 3 men flinch that morning. "You will pardon an old woman's questions," she said in a tone that suggested she had once asked kings for the favor of their silence and been given it. "This boy, he is given to sport." "Many boys are," Varys agreed, sipping a light wine that a man from the Reach had sworn by the Mother's mercy had been cooled with snow packed in straw from a mountain inn and brought down by an honest mule. "Hunting the hearts of small animals and large, riding pride as if it were a trained horse, aiming for targets he cannot hit." "He feeds it," Olenna said. "He does not let it feed on him. That is what worries me. Boys who give sport meat grow men who think themselves huntsmen." She folded one hand on the other. "My granddaughter will stand near this boy, the mother will stand nearer, and my granddaughter will need to be admired in a fashion that leaves her mind untouched. If admiration touches her, I will lose her. I do not like to lose things." "Few of us do," Varys said. "Fewer still possess the skill to prevent loss. I would like to meet all of them. Your grace is one." "Do not pet me," Olenna said. "I have fleas enough." "Tell me, Spider, can we survive him? I have lived long enough to know that you cannot go around every boy like him. You must go through one and make it look like walking." Varys watched the leaf shadows play across her hands as if they were maps. "The city will survive him," he said. "The question is who will be remembered as the hand that held the lamp while it did. And my little Rose? She will be remembered," Varys said gently, "for having grown where no one expected flowers to live. Whether she will be remembered as gardener or as blossom depends on how soon she learns which thorns are better concealed." "I will conceal them for her," Olenna said. "When the time comes, the cup will be pleasant to look at." Varys bowed his head as if to a tomb that had learned to give advice. "Then I shall ensure there is a table set." He left her there and went to a stair no one else took without first asking the stone whether it minded being trodden. At the top of it, a door gave onto a room where scent and sound and the idea of being safe had been gathered in a careful basket. Shay sat at the window, looking out at the river as if it were a ribbon someone had let fall and she might pick up again later. When Varys came in, she did not rise, which meant she had learned 2 or 3 of the necessary lessons already. "He loves you," Varys said, as if reciting a text for the sake of hearing whether it could still be made to sound sincere. He will tell himself this until it becomes a phrase he has no choice but to believe. He will ask you to make it easier to keep believing. He held out a pouch that clinked and did not cloy. "Go." She turned her head slowly, like a cat who has decided the bird is not worth the leap. "Where?" "Somewhere a river becomes a sea," Varys murmured. "Mere Pentos, a place where the women who laugh do not have to arrange to be paid for it. He will suffer and call it nobility. You will suffer and call it prudence. It is, unfortunately, neither. It is merely the best we can do with the rooms we have." "You are kind," she said through her teeth. "I am dutiful," he said. "There are men in this castle who will use you as a thread if you remain, and then will pull until the cloth is ruined. He is not strong enough to keep the cloth whole right now. I do not say he will never be. I am not cruel." She took the pouch and put it into the place where she put such things and looked back at the water. "I liked Lannisport," she said, surprising herself and him. It smelled of fish and of men who thought their hands were the reason they were alive. "I could see where the road ended and where the sea began and which one I would take if I had to run." Her voice softened into a mood. "This city smells of people who think they are roads." "Then run," Varys said, and thought, not for the first time, that leaving was an art the poor were forced to practice until they became better at it than the rich. Arya listened to songs about a lion with a green mane in a place where the trees had learned to lean away from roads. The men who sang were boys who had found hats and laughed too loudly because they could not afford silence. Gendry walked beside her and looked down every lane as if it owed him an apology. Hot Pie found a blackberry and ate it and then complained because a blackberry alone could not be dinner no matter how long you held it in your mouth and imagined bread around it. "Old Lion's dead," a tinker said to the man who sharpened knives on a bar with a wheel and a foot to turn it. "They say he folded like a stool when the green took him." "Stools don't fold," the knife man said. "They break." "They fold if they're cared for," the tinker said, and the knife man allowed that perhaps he was right. Arya said nothing. She had learned the price of saying things. She watched a woman with hair that had forgotten to be one color wash shirts in a stream and beat them against a stone, and she thought of beating a man against a table the same way. The names came in the order she had taught them to. She did not add to them today. She had no room. At night, with the fire down to the coals and the men who called themselves friends asleep in the way men sleep who might be enemies in the morning, she lay with her head against the bundle that contained the last of their bread and tried to hear the river that would become the trident that would become a road to a place with red stone and banners that had once made her feel safe. She allowed herself to think his name, Rob. She imagined him larger than he was and then shrank him a little so that he would fit into a cloak with the smell of horse on it and not be mistaken for a story. When she slept, she dreamed of a king with a red sword and a woman with hair like fire, and the dream frightened her less than it should have because it had no wolves in it. Roose Bolton received news the way a spider receives a fly, with an economy of motion and the mild, impersonal satisfaction of a creature for whom appetite is not an embarrassment. Harrenhal's burnt stones remembered kings who had believed themselves above fire and watched him with curiosity. The word of Tywin's death came to him on a torn scrap of parchment carried by a man whom any other lord would have hanged just to see if his neck broke neatly. Roose read it, sat, steepled his fingers as if unlearning a prayer, and said, "This was always likely." "Always?" the goat asked, licking something from between his teeth that had not been meat. "Always is a very large country, my lord." "Lion's age," Roose said. "Rivers are deeper in some places than men imagine. Fire is hotter where certain hands have been. The boy will be trouble." "Which boy?" Vargo Hoat asked, partially because he enjoyed hearing Roose say words with bees in them. Roose did not oblige him. He never did. "All boys," Roose said. "Find me the woman in blue who cannot be made to not be a knight. Find me the Kingslayer. Find me a letter I can send that says I will do one thing while I do another. This is the time for a man to be careful about which hands he shakes." Brienne saw the towers of Harrenhal and felt the particular emotion that such a sight had always produced in her. Pity. It had been built to frighten. It had frightened once. Then fire had shown it that fright cuts both ways. She rode into the yard with her back straight because discipline is a politeness paid to those who are about to be rude. Jaime looked around as if evaluating a show he had been forced to purchase a ticket for and sipped from an imaginary cup in condemnation of the actor's diction. "Lord Bolton," Brienne said, dismounting to the full measure of her height, "I am tasked by Lady Catelyn Stark to deliver a living man to the gates of King's Landing in exchange for 2 living girls, her daughters." Roose looked at Jaime as if he was listening to a piece of music that had a familiar motif performed badly. "The living man," he said, "has an inconvenient habit of being too alive." "I resolve my inconveniences," Brienne said. "You invite wolves," Roose said, "into rooms where birds are already nervous." He turned to a man in the corner with a mouth like a wound. "See them fed," he said. "See them watched. I will write a letter." Jaime smiled with his mouth and with his eyes and with the part of his face that remembered what his father would have done in this room. "Tell your quill to be kind," he said. "Its jokes are always crueler than it means." In the cellar of the Tower of the Hand, where men had been slowed into statues and then left to remember how to be bones, Pycelle tripped and fell and wiped his beard and pretended dignity, had a way of returning to rooms once it had been sent away to purchase stories for the men above. He lit a candle with hands that still shook from the habit of shaking. Tyrion followed him slowly, the steps complaining under his feet as if they remembered the last time they had had to bear him. "Careful," Pycelle said, because the stone had been put there to cause men to be careful, and he wanted to avoid being accused of having failed to remind them. "What a comfort you are," Tyrion said. The candle's light pushed back the darkness in a manner that made the darkness look honorable for its refusal to be pushed far. He looked at the shelf where his dragonglass dagger had once sat, the place where a strip of parchment had once been hidden, the corner where a rat had stolen a bit of stale cheese and celebrated afterward with a noise that had sounded too much like laughter. He put a hand against the wall where it had been broken and mended and felt the stone hold its breath. "Lord Tywin's study is being sealed," Pycelle said. "You are to have your own apartments. The Queen Regent has decided you will not require a larger chair." "The Queen Regent has decided I will not require many things," Tyrion said. "I grow used to such decisions." He took 2 steps and found himself at the door where Jon Arryn had once put his hand and expected the wood to surprise him by staying. "Did my father ever laugh in this room?" Pycelle considered. His beard made a small dry sound against his robe as he moved his head. "Once," he said, "when a man from the Reach wrote him a letter in which every word began with the same letter as his name. He called it a garden of nonsense. He laughed because he believed he would be alive to answer it with something cruel." "Ah," Tyrion said, "cruelty is a scribe who resents being interrupted." He blew out the candle. The dark embraced them with the eagerness of an old friend. Word of Tywin's death found Robb in a camp pitched under sky so big that every cloud looked like a messenger returning from a conquest with news it could not bear to speak aloud. He read it once, then again, then folded it into quarters as if folding would make the content become something else. Gray Wind lifted his head and made that sound he made when a stranger had come within tasting distance of the tent. Robb reached for the fur at the back of the wolf's neck and gripped it as if the beast were a handhold on a cliff. "Mother will move," he said to no one, and to Catelyn. "Edmure will argue. The Blackfish will pretend impatience to hide his pleasure in having been right. The Freys will want to be called back into the hall. We will give them cause." "You have given them cause," said Lord Karstark dryly from the tent's pole, where he had placed himself out of a habit of standing in corners to make rooms look smaller. "They will take their cause and drink it until their anger looks like humility, and then they will throw the cup in your face." Robb's mouth tightened, and the lines around it revealed a boy and a king arguing about whose face it belonged to. "I will send to the twins," he said. "I will sit like a penitent and let the old man cough his spit at me. I will tell him my error is an offering. He can plant it in his garden and tell it stories and watch it grow." "Your error grows without help," Karstark said, dispassionate. Tywin Lannister's death will cut one noose from your neck and put another there. There will be men in golden cloaks who will not go to the wall because they have found that they prefer wheat to snow when thinking of the future. There will be knights who look toward you and see that you are young and think of you as a horse they might ride without cost. Beware men who smile at boys with crowns. Robb touched the folded letter to the table and something in his face gentled, as if a wind had changed. My father died in a room that was not meant to be a death room, he said. This lion died in a place meant to make men believe they were living forever. The world is very neat when it wishes to be and very sloppy when it will teach us something. He lifted his eyes. We will take the West. We will take the Rock. We will make every man in Lannisport learn to pronounce the word Stark with care. The Rock, Karstark said. Do you know how to break stone with hunger? I know how to make men in stone rooms listen, Robb said, and Grey Wind thumped his tail against the ground as if enjoying the sound. Tywin taught me that. It will be his last lesson. Dantos found Sansa again in a stairwell where air had become a rumor and stone the only thing that meant to continue. He had a flower in his hair that had been put there by a girl who had been paid to do so and had not charged enough. Not today, he said before she could tell him not to speak. But soon. I have a little ship with a big captain and a man with a pitiful beard who knows how to be patient. When the sun sits on the river like a coin and men are too drunk on the sound of their own voices, then the dark will pay attention to you and no one else. He peered past her shoulder as if the dark had already arrived. Do you know your own name? I do, Sansa said. She kept her hands folded together so that their confidence would be doubled and their fear halved. Good, Dantos said. Hold it under your tongue when you go to the water. Do not spend it. He will buy you a different one for a while, and when we are far enough out to make choices, you can take yours back again. He touched the flower in his hair and removed it and dropped it down the stairwell, and they both watched it fall like a very small, very brave thing. Joffrey took Marjorie to the menagerie as if he had invented animals. He held out a slice of meat to a leopard through the bars and laughed when it took it with a suddenness that made the keepers flinch. See, he said as if to a boy, it knows whom to serve. It knows hunger, Marjorie said gently, and it has learned that men will put meat on the end of a stick and then declare themselves magicians for having been obeyed. She looked at the animal's paws. They were large as her face. It is a beautiful creature. I am told they do not thrive in cages. They thrive where I tell them to, Joffrey said. The city will be quieter now that the old man has been made quiet. My mother will be quieter too. Grief is a fountain, Marjorie said. Some drink in silence, some splash. I do not drink, Joffrey said. Ipur. He smiled, and she let her eyes make the appropriate appreciation of a thing that had been done neatly. You will look well in the throne room. You will look better, she said. She was, after all, a woman of her word. Night came early that day, as if the city had decided to practice what it would do in a year when winter bit harder. Lights went up along the street of silk like a confession. In a little room above a tannery where someone had had the sense to scrub with lavender until the stone forgot what had been done below, a man with a smooth beard unrolled a map and put on it a little wooden ship. Littlefinger smiled at it as if it were a woman who had been kind to him once when he was almost the person he would later be. He wrote a name beside the ship's prow with elegant care. The name did not belong to the ship yet. It would soon. In Dragonstone, Davos sat with a quill he could not quite believe belonged in his hand and wrote to a man whose name he had been made to say by men in black cloaks years before when he had not thought a wall of ice could be a thing one might love. He told the man that kings were dying by inches and by feet and by yards and by miles, and that there were men on the march who wore things under their skins that would not be combed out with fingers. He said the words slowly so that they would not trip. He told the man he had a boy who bled with a particular music and that there were ears eager for that song. He put the quill down and drew his hand back because it did not feel like his. The fire crackled in front of him with a satisfaction that made him want to throw stones into it until it told the truth. Jaime woke at Harrenhal to the sound of a man's mouth being washed and found. With an embarrassment he hid by making a joke, that he felt relief. Roosa's letter had gone, carried by a man with shoulders that had learned to make their presence an argument. Brienne polished her sword as if it were a reply she would give to a question no one had thought to ask. The goat's men looked at Jaime the way men look at a woman who has not spoken yet and whom they are certain they will not like when she does. The morning had an air of waiting, which Jaime despised. He was accustomed to rooms where his presence had made the waiting end. Before noon a rider came with a cloak of green and a mouth full of good news for himself. Lord Tyrell rides from Bitterbridge with 60 bannermen and a tent that could shelter a small village, he announced to anyone who belonged to the Act of Hearing. He brings grain and cheese and a man who calls himself a singer and certainly is not. He brings justice. He brings a looking-glass for the Queen. Does he bring a new hand? Someone asked in the yard, too low to be heard by the men with better cloaks and louder names. Jaime smiled at the sense that reached him like the smell of rain. He turned to Brienne. "Shall we practice jealousy?" he asked. "The roses will bloom, the lions will speak, the dwarfs will be charged with being taller than they ought. I am to be a coin passed from woman to woman in the hope that a girl's price may be met before it changes again." "You will be a man," Brienne said, "who walks where he is told to walk and learns whether he can choose to keep doing so." She sheathed her sword in a movement so honest that the goat's men flinched at the sight of it. That evening, in a room in the Red Keep where a tapestry told a story about men hunting a boar that had never happened, Cersei and Margaery looked at one another and performed. The older woman wore her grief like armor, as she had been taught by men who believed plate could be made of feelings if polished correctly. The younger wore her hope like silk. It moved when she did and gave the impression of being more substantial than it was. "You will sit with my son at the feast that will be held when this city has learned to chew the bread that has been put into its mouth," Cersei said. "You will look as if you have been brought to a table where you have always belonged but never expected to be seated." "I have always belonged where my king asks me to sit," Margaery said with the reverence appropriate to a girl talking about a chair. "I have always expected what is expected of me." Cersei's smile was as delicate as a knife. "You will find that in this city the expectation is that you will be admired and not believed," she said. "I have survived by being believed and not admired. We will see which skill the city prefers this winter." "Perhaps it will prefer both," Margaery said pleasantly. "It is known to be greedy." "Greed is a virtue in men," Cersei said, "and a vice in women. See you do not mistake which sex you are today." "I am what you need me to be," Margaery said, and the candled air warmed slightly at the steadiness of her tone. When the feast came, Tyrion discovered that he could swallow meat if it had been soaked long enough in sauce to forget its previous occupation. He found a seat that had obviously been chosen for him by someone who wished to appear generous while making it necessary for him to watch 3 men laugh who had recently laughed at him in a room where there had been no food. He drank slowly and let the wine do the work of pretending he was not counting. Joffrey called for music and was given it by men who had tuned carefully for the 4 days since the bells first tolled. He called for archery and was reminded by a look from his mother that one does not shoot arrows in a hall where men are eating unless one wishes to be remembered as a boy. He smiled at Margaery and she smiled back, and the room felt itself becoming a picture which it would later tell itself had been candid. Sansa watched all this from the place where he had put her to watch such things and told herself, again, the names of doors. When the noise swelled and moved toward the far end of the table, when the Queen and the Flower leaned toward one another to exchange a remark that the room would pretend to hear and then pretend to have not heard correctly, when Joffrey stood and announced that he would make an offering in his grandfather's name to the mother, Sansa felt a tug in her chest as if someone had put a finger through her dress from behind and meant to pull her backward down a stair. "Not yet," she told the tug, because Tyrion's eyes had found hers across the room and made a small shape that meant patience. He lifted his cup in a salute that was either to her or to his own exhaustion. She lifted hers because sometimes a woman raises a cup to both. The night was thick when she came out into it, and the river had learned to wear the dark well again. Down at the quays a ship cocked on the water as if it had been waiting for a story to step onto it. A man with a poor beard and a countess courtesy stood with a coil of rope in his hands that he held as if it were the fate of a modest nation. Dantos whispered her name once and the dark held it for her. She stepped forward and the stones under her feet made no sound because they were in league with doors. Behind her, far up the slope of the hill, the Red Keep held its breath. On Dragonstone, the boy's blood sat warm in a bowl and smoked faintly. Melisandre's face was an education. She muttered little words that men called big because they made them feel they had been allowed to attend a class to which they had not received an invitation. Stannis stood like a post set to hold up the sky and watched her with the particular attention of a man who knows he is being played and is content to learn the rules before he tips the board. Davos pressed his lips together until they whitened and thought of snow on a wall, and of a letter folded into a bird's foot, and of a door in a piece of ice that he meant to learn to love. Somewhere between Harrenhal and the Trident, Brienne woke at midnight to the smell of men who had decided they were brave. She stood with her sword in her hand before the men had decided that getting up would give them a better angle from which to swing. They saw her face in the moonlight and tried to remember the jeers they had practiced and found that the night had stolen them. Jaime stood, too, because pride makes men behave as if they had been trained in manners. The first man came forward with a chain wound around his wrist and a grin that had been taught to a boy. Brienne struck his grin away with the edge of the sword, and the chain became a toy that dropped into the grass. Another came and another, and the air filled with the sound of objects doing the only thing they are designed to do when asked incorrectly. Afterward, Jaime sat again and listened to his breath and disliked it. Brienne wiped her blade clean without ceremony. The boy who had stood watch, no longer a boy, looked at the bodies as if they were an alphabet he would be learning to read for years. "We should have a prayer," he said finally, because he was a decent child. Brienne nodded and said something that sounded like nothing and like everything. Jaime put his hand over his mouth and discovered it still belonged to him. The city learned its new color more fully with each dawn. Men drew lines on parchment with hands that had trembled yesterday and did not tremble today. Women went to the markets and priced cloth again and again until the coin and the cloth felt the same weight in the hand and could be made to perform the same tricks. Boys learned that the best place to watch a procession is 2 streets over from where it is supposed to pass, because the people you meet there are more interesting. Girls learned to ask for favors they had learned to avoid asking for when the old lion was alive. Priests invented new words for old sins. Tyrion found that he could walk from his bed to the window without being accompanied by the idea of falling. He stood there and watched the river for a long time. As one watches the face of a man one has offended enough times that one is certain of the next expression. It looked back with its old impassivity and its new memory. He thought of his father lying in a place where men would come to kneel who had not dared look him in the eye when he was alive, and of his sister learning that the city will only be impressed for so long, and of his brother riding through a world where birds perched on branches that bent and then lifted again without breaking. He thought of a girl walking down a set of steps and of the dark deciding to help her. He thought of a rose making itself comfortable in a room full of lions. Far away, at a rock that men had called unassailable because they had not worked hard enough at the assailing, a bell told that no one had rung. It sounded like a metal remembered the name of a man and then decided it had never liked him. In the cold north, where walls of snow learn the names of those who ask them for permission to pass, a boy with eyes like the inside of a storm made a decision that would leave a mark on a map later. In the east, a young woman with silver hair asked the word free to sit down and eat at her table. The world moved with the kind of patience that makes men call it cruel. When the next letter came to Riverrun with the red wax that had not learned to enjoy being melted onto parchment without thinking of blood, Catelyn did not open it immediately. She held it a while in her lap as if it were a child that had fallen asleep there and might wake if she moved. Then she broke the seal and read the script as if it were a face. The words said, "Your son is king north of a river. A lion's head has sunk. A knot may be untied if fingers do not tremble." She closed her eyes and thought of fingers, hers and other women's, and of the work they did, and of the doors those hands knew and the ones they did not, and of the fact that it is sometimes a blessing that a door remains closed because it keeps a room longer than it has any right to be. She set the letter down and lifted her head and said to the air between her and the window, as if it might carry the message to men in armor and to boys without boots and to wolves and to rivers. We will not be done soon. The air moved, very slightly, as if in ascent. That night the stars came out late and in different places, and sailors who knew the sky cursed gently and corrected their courses without telling the men on the quays how much correction had been required. On a narrow deck, a girl with her hair braided back under a hood sat on a coil of rope and did not look back because she had learned that looking back is a trick that the dark plays on the hopeful. Ahead of her the water opened like a story. Behind her a boy king laughed at something a man had said into his ear with a bow. Between them, the city breathed and turned in its sleep and reached for a face that it could put on in the morning. The river carried its green memory quietly, like a secret it had been given and had decided to keep.